Right now, I want to bring in MS Now legal affairs reporter Fallon Gallagher from outside the Supreme Court. Jake Traylor is covering the White House. Henrietta Treyz is co-founder and director of economic policy at Vita Partners. Jeffrey Rosen is a law professor at George Washington University. And with me in studio, MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin. Fallon, just run through this for us. What does this ruling say?
Yeah, Laura, this is a massive blow to the president for his signature agenda item from a conservative-leaning court that has typically been very sympathetic to the president and his agenda. In this ruling, this Supreme Court has found that IEEPA, that law that the president used to enact 5 categories of his sweeping tariffs, is unconstitutional for tariffs. That is, that the Congress has not given the president this authority to use that law. IEEPA.
Listen, I need to be brutally honest with you right now. This isn't just Trump throwing another tantrum over a court loss. This is a full-scale, deliberate assault on the American justice system. He's openly trying to brainwash the public into believing that any federal judge who rules against him isn't just mistaken. They're criminals who must be destroyed. He wants Congress to become his personal weapon to punish them. After decades in political analysis, I've never seen anything this dangerous. His own hand-picked conservative Supreme Court just torched his precious tariff empire, and instead of accepting the verdict, he's declaring war on judicial independence itself. This is authoritarianism in real time, and if we don't call it out, it will destroy what's left of our democracy.
2 invoked tariffs, and I want to read very briefly from Justice Roberts' majority opinion. He writes, IEEPA's grant of authority to, quote, regulate importation falls short. IEEPA contains no reference to tariffs or duties. The government points to no statute in which Congress used the word regulate to authorize taxation. And until now, no president has read IEEPA to confer such power. And I was inside court for oral arguments, and much of the discussion and debate surrounded on that word regulate and whether regulate meant tariff. Now, the justices here have found that it does not, that that is a power that is reserved for Congress, and that the president does not have the authority to use this specific statute to impose his tariffs. But notably also in this decision, it's written by Justice Roberts. That's not entirely surprising because the Chief Justice, when he sides with the majority, will typically write the opinion for these consequential cases. But notably, 3 of the typically conservative-leaning justices are in the majority here. You see Roberts, you also see Justice Gorsuch and Justice Barrett, who are here siding against the president in this very significant case. Laura?
Listen to me. This is where it gets truly terrifying. Trump isn't just upset about losing on tariffs. He's actively pushing legislation to criminalize judicial independence, weaponizing Congress to punish any judge who dares say no. Public intimidation campaigns, systematic delegitimization of the only branch still brave enough to check his power. The framers designed separation of powers for precisely this reason, to stop any president from treating the courts like his personal subordinates. Yet this thin-skinned, power-drunk wannabe has decided the Constitution no longer applies to him. And right now, even as the White House scrambles to contain the damage from this humiliating defeat, Trump's disgraceful reaction is already unfolding in real time.
Fallon, thank you for that. And we just have some news from the press secretary, who said that President Trump will hold a press briefing on the Supreme Court's tariffs decision at 12:45 p.m. Eastern today. Jake, what are we hearing from the president so far from the White House?
Yeah, Laura, she dropped that literally at noon on the dot. She was teeing it up for your show, I guess. So we will hear from the president for the first time at 12:45, unless we get a Truth Social post first. This is sometimes how it goes, but it was a bit notable that when this decision came down, the president was actively in a meeting, a bipartisan meeting with governors at the White House. And a White House official that was in the room tells me that a note was brought in, given to the president. This is when the press had already been escorted out, so there were no cameras capturing this in the moment. The president read that the SCOTUS decision had been made, not in his favor. He then addressed the governors directly and said, quote, "It's disgraceful what the courts have done." That was according again to a White House official who was in the room for that moment. In terms of other things that are happening internally at the White House right now.
Let me pull back the curtain on this because the timeline of events is critical, and the connective tissue between them is what most mainstream coverage is failing to stitch together. The story accelerates in that tense period when the calendar pages turn and the chill of late-season political battles fills the air. The president standing before a gathering of Republican lawmakers, learning in real time that his signature tariff plan had just been struck down by his own Supreme Court. What he did next exposed everything.
Another White House official tells me that obviously at this point, the West Wing is very aware. For a long time now, the president, as well as other senior officials, have been teeing up that they have some way to counteract a decision of this sort happening. Another White House official told me that they are unsurprised by this decision and that this is something they've planned for a long time. What we lack at the moment are actual substantive details of how they intend to counteract this SCOTUS ruling. The president, as early as last night, railed against the Supreme Court, saying he had been waiting time after time for a ruling to come down. Take a listen to that.
I've been waiting forever. And the language is clear that I have the right to do it as president. I have the right to put tariffs on for national security purposes, countries that have been ripping us off for years. You know what they were doing? Using tariffs. What a country. So sad.
Laura, as you can tell, the president pretty fired up right there in that moment. A couple of big questions, of course, right now are, one, what happens to all of the money that companies have already paid due to the current tariff ruling that exists before the ruling came down today? And then secondly, of course, as the White House keeps saying, they have a plan, which we know they say a lot of times. They've been working on something to counteract. What are the specific details of that? Hopefully this press conference in just the hour will give us some new detail there.
Launched into a tirade that, had it come from any previous president, would have triggered a constitutional five-alarm fire across the nation. Standing in front of his own Republican lawmakers, Trump didn't talk about securing borders or fighting crime in the streets. No, he demanded a brand new crime bill with one very specific target: federal judges. Not drug dealers, not violent criminals, but American judges who had the nerve to do their constitutional duty and check his power. This is the same man who once claimed to be the champion of law and order, now openly trying to criminalize the judiciary itself. A thin-skinned bully so enraged by losing to his own Supreme Court that he's demanding Congress turn the courts into his personal enemies list.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions about that, too, that Jeffrey, I'm going to go to you in just a moment. But first, Lisa, I want to come to you here. What stuck out to you about this decision?
There are a bunch of things that stuck out to me. Let's start with the thing that struck both Fallon and I alike. Across 170 pages, Laura, there are 7 different opinions written by the 9 members of the court. That means that while 6 justices got to the result that IEEPA, the statute on which the president was relying, doesn't authorize him to impose the tariffs at issue, they got there in different ways. Think about it as like a choose-your-own-adventure book. It all has the same ending, but what happens in the middle for some of these justices is quite different. The other thing that struck me about it is it's a victory not only for the plaintiffs who brought the case, but for Congress as a whole, even if some Republican members of Congress don't see it that way.
His words were not ambiguous. Trump looked Republican lawmakers in the eye and called federal judges rogue. He labeled their decisions dangerous and wrong. Then he dropped the bomb. He called them criminals who need to be cracked down on. Not through impeachment, the constitutional process designed for actual misconduct, but through some new punitive legislation. This is a president so unhinged by losing that he's openly demanding Congress treat sitting judges like street thugs. The same judges, including 2 he appointed himself, who simply reminded him that he doesn't have unlimited power.
Opinion for the court, you read Justice Gorsuch's concurrence, you see them basically say, the power to regulate importation, which was the phrase at issue here, isn't one where we know exactly what it means, but here's what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean the power to tax. That is a power that is reserved constitutionally to Congress. When it wants to give it to the president, it knows how to do it and how to choose the right words in terms of how to do it. And in Justice Gorsuch's concurrence, he even has sort of a overture to the importance of the legislative process, that it is messy, that it is long, but that in the structure of our constitutional system, Congress's role is one that includes not only the power to tax, but the power to make laws, and that we as a country need to respect that. Even if it takes time, there is a value in that. So I see this court really vindicating Congress here, even at a time where Congress isn't doing much legislating on its own. Laura.
Right. We saw Congress push back here and there on specific tariffs that the president imposed, but the justices were saying essentially that if Congress wanted to expressly give this power to the president, they would have said so explicitly. Yes. And just so for the folks at home, when we say IEEPA, we're talking about the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which was passed in the 1970s. But Jeffrey, on what happens next, those questions that Jake laid out, what does happen now? Are these tariffs gone? Can the president impose other tariffs that he wants to? And what happens to the money?
He wasn't talking about appealing the ruling through normal legal channels. Trump was explicitly demanding that judges who rule against him be treated as criminals, that simply doing their constitutional job becomes a prosecutable offense. As a veteran political and legal analyst, this is straight-up authoritarian madness. This is an unprecedented assault on Article 3, judicial independence, and the entire separation of powers. A narcissistic, thin-skinned bully who can't stand being told no, even by the conservative justices he bragged about appointing, is now trying to criminalize the judiciary itself. And the Republican lawmakers in that room? They sat there like cowards, saying nothing while he attacked a co-equal branch of government. Now the country is left facing the very real and chaotic consequences of this landmark ruling.
Well, that's the central question, and the answer isn't clear. For the tariffs that have already been paid, which is up to billions of dollars, individual importers have to sue one by one to get them back. And some have already filed lawsuits. Others will file them in the future, but that's going to be a messy and complicated process. The administration has said that it's going to try to reimpose tariffs under other authorities, other statutes, but they don't give the president as much flexibility as the emergency law does. So some of them may go forward and others may not. This is going to create tremendous uncertainty for investors, for consumers, and for international trade partners. Canada, for example, already says that most of its goods are not under tariffs, but it doesn't think that this decision will have a huge impact on the trade war with Canada. So although it's extraordinarily important and historic that the Supreme Court has asserted the separation of powers, has made clear that the president can't exercise authority that's granted to Congress, this will not by any means stop tariffs globally, nor will it definitively resolve how people can be reimbursed for tariffs that they've already paid.
So I guess we'll have to wait and see what other kinds of tariffs can stay in effect or that the administration may impose. But Henrietta, earlier this month, the Tax Foundation said Trump's tariffs cost the average household an extra $1,000 last year. And over the course of 2025, we saw items like coffee and tea go up almost 12%. One study found ground beef spiked 19%. So what does this mean? What does the decision mean for the average American when it comes to their pocketbook?
This demand for a judge punishment bill did not appear out of nowhere. It came hot on the heels of a humiliating 6-3 defeat at the Supreme Court, a defeat delivered in part by 3 justices Trump himself appointed. The marble temple of justice, the very institution he claimed to have reshaped in his image, just dropped a legal anvil on his signature economic policy. Let's be crystal clear about what happened. In a meticulously reasoned 170-page decision, the court ruled that Trump had grossly abused the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. 6 justices, including Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Gorsuch, and Justice Barrett, looked at the statute and said what any first-year law student should have known. Regulate importation does not mean impose unlimited tariffs. Taxation is Congress's power under Article 1, full stop. This wasn't a liberal court slapping down a conservative president. This was a conservative court stacked by Trump telling him he is not a king. And instead of showing even a shred of humility, this man threw a public meltdown and immediately began plotting revenge against the judiciary. He didn't issue a measured statement of disappointment. He didn't vow to work with Congress on new legislation. No, he took to Truth Social, attacked his own appointees, and branded the Supreme Court itself as weaponized. He called the ruling disgraceful and bad. Then, in front of Republican lawmakers, he demanded they pass a new crime bill, not targeting criminals on the street, but targeting federal judges who refused to rubber stamp his wishes. This is deranged. This is dangerous. And this is un-American. As a political and legal analyst who has studied executive power for decades, I can tell you this crosses every historical norm. Never in modern American history has a president so openly tried to criminalize the exercise of judicial review. The framers designed the judiciary to be independent precisely to prevent this kind of authoritarian impulse. Alexander Hamilton, in Federalist No. 78, called the courts the bulwarks of a limited constitution against legislative invasions and, by extension, against executive overreach. Trump is trying to tear those bulwarks down. Let's talk about the deeper legal implications. When Trump claims Article 2 gives him unlimited power, he is echoing the discredited unitary executive theory pushed to its most extreme and dangerous form. The Supreme Court has repeatedly rejected this, most famously in Youngstown Sheet and Tube Co. v. Sawyer, 1952, where Justice Jackson laid out the three-tier framework of presidential power. When the president acts against the will of Congress or in areas where Congress has not granted authority, his power is at its lowest ebb. That is exactly where Trump stood on these tariffs. And the court correctly slapped him down. Yet instead of accepting that constitutional reality, Trump is now attempting to intimidate and delegitimize the very institution that checked him. This is not just rhetoric. This is a strategy. Look at the judiciary's unprecedented response. The Judicial Conference, the policymaking body for the entire federal judiciary, issued formal guidance allowing judges to speak out publicly in defense of judicial independence. That is the institutional equivalent of pulling a fire alarm. These are people who normally maintain monastic silence. When they feel forced to speak, you know the threat is severe. Then came Chief Justice John Roberts himself, the very definition of institutional restraint, publicly declaring that dangerous personal attacks on judges have got to stop. He wasn't being subtle. He was looking directly at the White House and saying, enough. This should have been front-page news for weeks. Instead, much of the country barely noticed. That tells you how numb we've become to Trump's daily assaults on democratic norms. But here's the part that should truly terrify you. This war on the judiciary is not happening in isolation. It's happening while Trump makes reckless threats about Iran, rhetoric so extreme that former military lawyers and JAG officers have warned it could cross into war crimes territory. The judges who might have to rule on the legality of those actions, the lawyers who must advise the military on unlawful orders, those are exactly the people Trump is now trying to brand as criminals and rogue. This is preemptive neutralization of the rule of law. He's clearing the battlefield before he gives the next dangerous order. Trump's theory is simple and terrifying. Article 2 means he can do whatever he wants. If you accept that premise, then any judge who says no is not fulfilling their oath. They are sabotaging the president. And saboteurs must be punished. That closed loop of logic leads straight to dictatorship. The Supreme Court just proved that theory is constitutionally bankrupt. Even Trump's own justices refuse to endorse it. Gorsuch and Barrett, two of the brightest stars of the conservative legal movement, chose the Constitution over loyalty to the man who put them on the bench. That should have been a moment of humility for Trump. Instead, it enraged him. Because at his core, this is not about tariffs. This is not about trade. This is about power. Absolute, unchecked personal power. He cannot tolerate being told no by anyone he cannot fire. And that includes federal judges with lifetime appointments. The silence from congressional Republicans has been deafening and shameful. These are the same people who swore an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. When the enemy is sitting in the Oval Office attacking a co-equal branch, they say nothing. Their cowardice is enabling this dangerous precedent. This is not normal. This is not sustainable. This is a direct test of whether American institutions can survive a president who views the Constitution as an annoying obstacle rather than the supreme law of the land. The courts are doing their job. They are enforcing the separation of powers that the framers designed to protect us from exactly this kind of man. The question now is whether the rest of the country, especially Congress, has the courage to do the same. Because if Trump's next move is to treat a Supreme Court ruling like a worthless piece of paper, we are heading toward a constitutional crisis unlike anything we've seen in our lifetimes. This has been one of the darkest chapters in modern American governance. A president humiliated by the law, responding not with compliance but with vengeance. A man so addicted to power that he would rather burn down the guardrails of democracy than accept any limit on his will. Stay vigilant. The next chapter is coming, and it may arrive faster than any of us want to admit. The rule of law is under direct assault. We must defend it, or watch it crumble in real time. This is the fight for the soul of our constitutional order. If you believe the courts must remain independent and Trump's authoritarian playbook must be exposed, smash that like button, subscribe, and share this video right now. I'll see you in the next one. Stay awake, America.